Biden's brutal inflation numbers hitting the books. Everybody was prognosticating that this was a foreseeable outcome, except maybe them. But we now see that the numbers are not good. They were hoping that they were going to put a taper on some of this inflation so that all of us could get back to our lives after being locked away for 2 years and after spending billions and trillions of dollars in order to paper over this stuff. Well, it's all coming home to roost. The chickens are finally here, as Obama would say. And we're going to go through this. We've got the Biden White House trying to paper over this, reaction from the Republicans. But we're going to start on top. As soon as those numbers hit, as soon as the inflation numbers hit, and you've seen them, and there are all sorts of different interpretations, and people will say, well, what does this mean? And what about CPI with energy and with food, and take out the rent and add all these numbers in, and 0.1 and 8.3 and 10.12.3 and on and on and on and on. Well, you can see sort of what the consequences of all those numbers are just by taking a look at the stock market. And the analyst over on CNBC, he was looking at it, and this is what it looked like today when it hit, right? And this was at the start of the day. 32,287 is where it started. And you can just see that flashing little orb there at the bottom of this chart is the collapse of the stock market. Yeah, it didn't look good. And you can see right here as the markets are opening on the day, it's just a sea of red. And, look, I am not somebody who likes to take glee in hardship of other Americans. And I'm not going to do that here, right? When this stuff happens, a lot of people get wiped out. A lot of people get hurt. And it's a terrible, terrible thing. And, I don't want this to become like a COVID death scoreboard that we criticized here all the time, where, they would just publish more dead bodies and everybody on CNN would be like, yes, Trump's going down. Look at all these dead people. Yeah, more dead bodies. And so, the red bloodbath is sort of like that. It's like, my gosh, God, it really is bad. But on the other hand, you're like, well, we told you so. I mean, good Lord. How, look, I'm not an economics major, but I can certainly tell you that if you start printing money out of thin air, hand over fist, and doling it out with no rhyme or reason, you might cause some problems in the economy. But again, I didn't go to Harvard or Oxford, so what the hell do I know? But this guy obviously pays a lot of attention to this stuff. And so let's listen to him explaining this at the outset of the morning, and then we'll check back in with CNN and see what they have to say at the close of the markets. Here it is this morning.
It's food that we have to pay attention to, up 0.6%, double the expectation. And
now
the high water mark there is up 0.9. That was in April, and that went back to 1981, up 0.6. Well, if you look at up 0.7 in June, that's kind of our
Now, you just look at the different charts flipping around, right? And look at all of the markets just adjusting massively. Major raises in the 10-year treasuries, dollars going up massively, and he's just riffing through the numbers. But then you get to this. Look at it, the fair value, S&P, and it's just blood red all over the place. And it kind of just trended that way all throughout the remainder of the day. Even Bitcoin and all of these things, you can see Bitcoin down here in the bottom left shed about 500 points. And it just was like red blood, death, not good, all over the markets. And we all have to live with that, right? This is problematic for all of us. And the reason why it's important to pay attention to it, and I think the reason why some people might mistake the attention with sort of giddiness or glee, is that this stuff is critical to everything else that we do, and it's been foreseeable. And a lot of people have been saying this is going to be the result, and now it's here. And so those people, of course, are feeling vindicated. That was at the start and the opening of the market. CNN and Jake Tapper, unfortunately, had to break the news to their audience that things did not look good today. At the close of the market, Jake Tapper breaking news saying, stock market closed pretty down. Things are pretty bad over here. Why don't I turn it over to you, so-and-so, so you can explain how all this works for us.
Welcome to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. We start with breaking news in the Money Lead, one of the worst days of the year for investors.
Yikes.
Stocks taking a remarkable tumble. The Dow closing down more than 1,200 points on the heels of today's inflation report. You hear the bell there, the closing bell. Fears of a recession.
Now here, this is kind of hilarious. So you just saw that Mr. Tapper was walking us through this graphic here. That looks pretty rough, right? Minus 1,200. Oh, that's not too good. Almost 4% down on the day. Pretty rough. But then they cut over to this screenshot of these happy people to ring the closing bell. And they're all celebrating. And so What a horrible day. You sort of wait, I guess, your whole life to go bang that gavel on the New York Stock Exchange on the closing bell, and you're going to do it on the worst day since June of 2020. Not really that much to post about on Instagram, I guess.
In the air, let's get right to CNN business correspondent Rahel Solomon in New York. Rahel, how bad and how serious is this damage?
Tell us.
Pretty serious, and it was bad and only got worse throughout the day as losses accelerated. Yikes. To put this in perspective, Jake, this was the worst day for the Dow since June of 2020. So this was a historically bad day. As investors digested this morning's inflation report, I want to take you to the Dow closing lower by about 4%, the S&P 4.3%, and the Nasdaq about 5.2%, let's call it. So why is all of this happening? Well, that inflation report we got this morning, which, by the way, comes a week before the Fed is set to meet again, but it showed that while energy prices are declining, and so inflation seems to be easing a bit, slightly, and a lot of key categories, Jake, inflation continues to accelerate. Categories like shelter, categories like food, categories like medical care costs. So that is really concerning.
Yeah.
When the Fed meets next.
Yeah, it is concerning. She said, right, everything seems like it's kind of accelerating in a lot of those areas. Food, shelter, medical supplies, all going up. Yeah, gas is going down because everybody realized, holy crap, it's almost $5 a gallon where I'm living. And we got to really pump the brakes literally on this thing. But the other markets, the other categories are running away. And CNN is reporting it. They're sitting here going, yeah, it's pretty bad. Worst day since June 2020. And remember the situation in June 2020, right? The problem back then was we were in the middle of COVID. We had just declared a national, emergency back in March, and the whole country was coming to a screeching halt, and they were starting to print money hand over fist. But CNN now having to break the news that things are not looking so good for the country. And it's not good news, right? Schadenfreude is the idea that you sort of like to see your enemy fall off his roof a little bit. But we all have to live here. We all have to live with that person and with the economic conditions that they have created before they fell off the roof. Joe Biden was out today celebrating this stuff. And I talked about this on our morning walk and talk for members on Locals or members on YouTube. But we went through this and Biden is sort of spiking the football. If you go over to the White House Twitter account or the president's feed, he's out there all morning. Oh, yeah, Inflation Reduction Act. What a tremendous victory. And all these videos of, little old ladies with like puppies or something. Like, oh, okay, well, she seems happy. So I guess the country must be great. All day. And he gave this little speech. We're going to hear about it in a minute. But even CNN was saying, holy moly, this is pretty unfortunate. Here's Joe Biden in front of some DC building out there, wherever he is. And he is communicating that the Inflation Reduction Act is going to bring us all to the promised land or something. Simultaneously, take a look at this graphic of the Dow Jones Industrial Average over here on the right. Down red arrow. It says minus 1217.42. That's 1,217 points on the day. Now you can see the chyron at the bottom of the screen says Biden celebrates the passage of his Inflation Reduction Act. And you go, oh, well, that's not a whole lot of cause for celebration there, Joe. Let's listen to what this CNN anchor says as she notices the weird juxtaposition of the crashing stock market with Joe Biden's celebratory speech.
Stood up.
Okay, you're listening there to President Biden at the White House. He's celebrating the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. He says that he's been fighting Big Pharma for decades. But there is this unfortunate split screen right now with the Dow taking a total beating, down more than 1,200 points. And so it feels like it's hard to be celebratory for some people in the crowd.
Yeah, kind of a rough day to be out there spiking the football when the stock market has been absolutely demolished on the day. But Joe Biden does that because most of the time he doesn't really know where he is or what we should be talking about at any given point in time. Now, there is a real possibility, that tomorrow that this thing rallies all the way back, and we've seen these swings come and go. And so it may not be something that is a permanent, down, but it certainly gives you some hint that a lot of the people with a lot of money and investors and people who are in these markets don't have a whole lot of confidence based on these newly released numbers. Simultaneously with Joe Biden's delusion, we of course have Nancy Pelosi, who is out there, who is also communicating something about the Inflation Reduction Act. Here is Nancy Pelosi saying why this was such an important bill.
Many friends, what a thrill it is to be here to celebrate this life-changing legislation, making the Inflation Reduction Act. Inflation Reduction Act, so beautifully named for all that it does.
Beautifully named.
As the name suggests, this landmark law is...
Okay, the Inflation Reduction Act, as you would imagine, should be reducing inflation, and it should do so by the act, the law. What they're passing should reduce inflation, right? And she just said, what a beautiful name this thing is. Now, what does it actually do? Does it reduce inflation, Nancy?
Cutting costs and inflation fighting and driving down costs for kitchen table items for America's working families. Mr. President.
Inflation fighting, reducing costs for kitchen table items, I guess. I'm still waiting to see what this results in. Like, are your eggs and milk and cereal going to be cheaper? Is your bacon going to be cheaper now that we have this Inflation Reduction Act? So Nancy Pelosi, I think, had a difficult time getting the name right. Still must not know exactly what inflation means. Meanwhile, here is what the White House said on these horrific numbers. Statement of the president, Joe Biden, on the new CPI numbers in September. The president said, today's data show more progress in bringing global inflation down in the U.S. economy. And I don't really know what that is supposed to mean, to be honest with you. Bringing global inflation down in the U.S. economy. All right, let's see if we can figure this out. Overall, prices have been essentially flat in our country these last 2 months, he says. That is welcome news for Americans with more work to do. Gas prices are down an average of $1.30 a gallon beginning of the summer. This month, we saw some price increases slow from the month before at the grocery store. But they're still going up. And real wages went up again for the second month in a row, giving people breathing room. And he says it's going to take more time and resolve to bring inflation down, which is why we passed the Inflation Reduction Act to lower the cost of healthcare, prescription drugs, and energy. And my economic plan is showing that as we bring prices down, we're creating good paying jobs and bringing manufacturing back to America. Oh, my goodness. Well, all right. So not a whole lot to say on that other than it's more time. Hang on, more time to resolve and bring inflation down. But I guess, yeah, so it's going to lower your costs. So I think the plan here is not to actually reduce inflation. It's just to provide more funds for people who might be hit harder by the inflation, right? So it's actually spending money to introduce more money into the economy to deal with the inflation. So you're sort of printing money that causes inflation to deal with the inflation you've already caused by giving people more things like healthcare, prescription drugs, and energy subsidies off of printed money that we don't have, which will go back into the inflationary cycle. Okay, so that is our president. Holy moly. All right, so that's what we've got out of there. Now, about as clear as that is, we still need to go over to Karine Jean-Pierre because she's going to give us a little bit more details on what the White House has to say about all this. This is the White House press secretary, Karine. She gets asked by somebody in the media. They say, the inflation numbers just came out. Looks like it's worse than it's supposed to be. And you said that your Inflation Reduction Act was going to resolve this. It doesn't seem like it's working. What say you, Miss White House?
On the inflation report that came out today, the president is promising that the Inflation Reduction Act will do just that and bring down costs. But this bill does not address food or housing, prices of which we are seeing going up. So what is your message to Americans who are seeing these rising costs? And are you confident that you're doing enough to finally bring these down?
So look, the president has said for some time now, when it comes to his number one economic priority is to deal with inflation, is to make sure that we are lowering costs for Americans, for the American people, for American families, Americans who have to come around the table, once a month in particular to figure out how are they going to pay those bills. Again, this is why the event that we're having in less than 45 minutes to celebrate and talk about, you'll hear from the president about the Inflation Reduction Act, is so critical. That is why Democrats and this president took did the hard work to get that done, is to lower costs on healthcare, to lower cost on prescription drugs, and also energy costs as well. Look, when you look at the data, the inflation data, we're seeing more progress bringing global inflation down in the U.S. economy.
There it
as
is.
I just stated moments ago. Overall,
bringing the global inflation down in the U.S. economy. She said that right there. What the heck does that even mean?
The inflation data, we're seeing more progress bringing global inflation down in the U.S. economy, as I just stated moments ago. Overall, prices have been essentially flat.
Look, I don't know what kind of global inflation she's talking about. Okay, we in the United States, we printed a ton of money of US dollars, and we have a bunch of dollars that we inflated, right? So I think most Americans are concerned about American inflation in America, not global inflation based on whatever, everybody else is doing. So I don't really know what she's talking about. Maybe somebody from Oxford can enlighten me. But that's Karine Jean-Pierre responding to some of this stuff. And we had a very interesting little locals tip came in from our very own happy, emotional, sometimes grouchy old cat lady. And she's sharing this over from trueflation.com. Yeah, and trueflation.com is a website that is supposed to sort of measure things based on the actual cost of goods that you see out there. And food, 11%, transportation, 11%, utilities, 14%, alcohol, 6%, and so on. So, right, the numbers are all rigged. Thank you to emotional old cat lady for those Trueflation numbers and for the tip over on locals. But we have reaction now. Republicans responding to this terrible inflation news. Senator Marsha Blackburn is out. She says, this is a lot worse than it even sounds. The numbers here are really compounding, and they're trying to hide them and sort of lie to you about what they really mean. Here is the senator.
The inflation numbers are in 8.3% for this month. We're up over 13% over the past year and a half. Bidenflation is on the rise. So why would the White House think today was a great day to go out and celebrate spending another $700 billion?
That goes right back into the problem.
$$1 billion in new taxes. $369 billion for the Green New Deal that is going to run up the cost at the pump, the cost of your electric bill, and the cost of everything you buy. I tell you what, it is beyond me what they are thinking, but what I do know is Tennesseans are tired of this.
Well, we'll see what the Republicans do about it. Haven't heard much out of them by way of proposals other than, Lindsey Graham saying something about abortion, whatever. But, on these issues, the Republicans are largely asleep at the wheel. Meanwhile, we've got Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is saying inflation is just a part of the problem. The Biden policies are much more disastrous than just inflation. Look at everything else. We've got crime, we've got border problems, we've got school problems, a whole litany of them. Inflation is just the very beginning.
If you look at the issues that are racking the country, that are hurting Americans across the country, you have number one, inflation. The Democrats have no plan for inflation other than to make it worse, to spend trillions more and drive inflation up even more. Gas prices, they have no plan to reduce gas prices other than to make it worse by hammering American oil and gas production. Crime, they have no plan to reduce crime other than to make it worse by continuing to support radical leftist DAs and leftists who try to undermine, defund, or abolish the police. And illegal immigration, they have no plan to stop. They don't want to stop. Their plan is more illegal immigration, more chaos at the border. And so their only political strategy, which you can see their cronies in the corporate media leaning in on, is distraction. They want to scream Donald Trump all day long because there is nothing on planet Earth they hate more than Donald J. Trump. They want to unleash corrupt partisans at the Department of Justice and the FBI to go after Donald Trump to try to distract people. And they want to send Joe Biden up to give the most divisive and hateful speech we have seen a president give in our lifetimes, calling half of the country fascists. They're hoping to scare people into showing up and voting for an agenda that's failing. And what's amazing, They don't plan to change. They don't promise change. They promise more of the same disastrous policy agenda.
It does, in fact, seem like they are doubling down everywhere you look. We just heard from Bannon, and that's now been vetted and verified by CBS News and by Tucker Carlson and by Harmeet Dillon. But they are going after more Trump allies, more people who are in his circle. And so it feels like it's just the beginning. The Biden administration is continuing to slide into disarray. Their policies are falling apart at the seams, and they've got nothing left to talk about or to do other than to prosecute their political enemies. And so that is now their A game. Of course, we will continue to cover that.